I got too many books. Okay, let's see. Welcome back to Mish Reads. Today we're going to be doing my quarter one wrap up for 2025. I've been reading a ton this year. I owe that a lot in part to Libby. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I like to listen to them while I craft, while I get ready, while I drive, sometimes at work if things are a little bit more mindless, like data entry, that kind of thing. And yeah, I think it's become quite the hyper focus for me. And I've read, drum roll, 44 books from January 1st through March 31st. So we are going to go through my stats, some of my favorites, and just have a little chat. So let's get right into it. I absolutely love using Storygraph to track my book stats and to track my reading. I do use Goodreads and Fable, but I would say as far as what's my most used and what I get the most value out of, I would have to say Storygraph, because I love tracking my pages. I love that they have already in there every single edition possible for each book, so you can actually track what you're reading. You can find, they even had this version of Fellowship of the Ring, this ISBN, this cover already in there, and that just brings me a lot of joy. I really like being able to have that accuracy in my tracking. And then I do pay for Storygraph Plus, so I've been enjoying doing some custom graphs, and I'll add in, when we start talking about that, I'll add in some screenshots of that. It's just been really fun, and it's absolutely my favorite way to track my reading, aside, of course, from my reading journal, which is my physical tracking. But anyway, so getting into the numbers. So I read 44 books for a total of 15,463 pages. That's crazy. The specific month-by-month breakdown: in January, I read 13 books with a total of 4,839 pages. In February, I read 16 books with a total of 5,137 pages. And in March, I read 15 books with a total of 5,487 pages. Whew! So my top genres across all these books were sci-fi, thriller, and romance. I read 14 sci-fi books, 13 thrillers, and 12 romances. And if any of you guys if any of you guys watched my goals for 2025, my sub-goals that I was going to be tracking were: I wanted to read 2 library books a month. I wanted to diversify my reading. And what that means to me is I wanted to read more books by people who do not share my identity. That's that. I wanted to work on my physical TBR. I wanted to read at least 1 book from my physical TBR per month. I wanted to try and read 2 Kindle Unlimited books per month. And then I do subscribe to Aardvark and Book of the Month. So I wanted to make sure that each month I was reading those books that were coming in. So those were my goals. And I'm going to pop up a graph. Unfortunately, for the custom graphs, anyone who does this will have to let me know if I can specify by dates. But when I took this screenshot, it was already 2 weeks into April. So this isn't completely accurate for quarter one. It goes a little bit into quarter two. But just to show you my progress on my goals, we can see that I'm killing it on my library goal, reading a ton, doing really well on reading diversely, and then pretty meh on everything else. So in the first quarter, I only read 3 Kindle Unlimited books. So that math doesn't work out. If I was sticking to my goals, I would have needed to have already read 6 books from Kindle Unlimited. So I'm putting this on a maybe if I'm going to keep continuing subscribing. And I know there's a lot of discourse going around. Obviously, we don't want to be supporting Amazon. I still like 10 toes down support. Do not buy your physical books from Amazon. They're purposefully undercutting the market to kill off other competitors. But I feel conflicted about Kindle Unlimited specifically because I know of so many indie authors that I follow online who depend greatly upon Kindle Unlimited. And I think it just speaks to the unfortunate reality that we're in, where there is so much gray area, and a true boycott will harm some people of these communities that we want to support. And so I'm just conflicted there, but absolutely let me know your thoughts. Let me know how your guys are doing with that, if that's something that you guys have been thinking about. But yeah, anyway, on to the book subscription. Only missed 1 month. So I read both of my January books, didn't read either of my February books, and then I read both of my March books. So doing okay there, and I have plans to catch up on those February books soon. But yeah, I think for that one, I definitely struggle to find more time to sit down and physically read a book, because I would say my number one form of reading is audiobooks, so listening, followed by Kindle reading, whether that be a book that I own or Kindle Unlimited. Most likely lately it's been books that I own, because I'll do that as I'm putting the kids to bed or as I'm going to bed myself, because I can, I don't have to sit there with my bright light for my clip-on light for my books, blaring myself and my husband in our faces. And so making time to sit and read physical books is definitely a lot harder for me. So I understand why that's a goal that I'm not necessarily nailing, but I wanna get better. And if I don't, then I wanna be real with myself and say, okay, this is not something that we should be continuing buying these books if we're not going to be reading them. So that's where we are with that. And now we're going to jump into my favorites from quarter one. So we're gonna do top 5, and then I'll just do like a rapid of a couple others that really stood out for me. So top 5, number 5 was The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. I read this on New Year's Day, so really started off the year with a bang. And for me, this just brought everything together so nicely for Mistborn Era 1. My mind was blown. I had guessed a couple of things that ended up happening here, but the overall conclusions caught me by surprise in such a fun, emotional, and surprising way. I felt like every character that we followed along with had a really important and nice conclusion to their stories. There wasn't a lot of loose ends. I mean, obviously, I really enjoyed the world, and so I could have read more in this world, and I'm in the middle of reading in Mistborn Era 2. But as far as what he set out to do with the plot of this 3-book trilogy, I thought was incredible. I thought the magic system was so unique and really enjoyed it. So that was a great way to start the year. Then number 4, I got to get my hands on a digital arc of Left of Forever by Tarah DeWitt, and it was one of my most highly anticipated reads of the year, and I'm so happy to say that it did not disappoint. I absolutely loved it, and I can't wait for it to come out. It comes out next month in May, so definitely go pre-order that, pick it up, please. She is, I think, one of the best to be doing it right now in contemporary romance, and I just love her storytelling. Yeah, I loved it so much. Number 3 was Our Infinite Fates by Laura Steven. This is a YA fantasy. If you go on my page, you can see a review a short I did to review this. But this is a book that I actually annotated, which I very rarely do. It just was speaking to me so much. I loved it so much. There's something so special, in my opinion, about a YA romance. I think there's so much tension and yearning and love, and working within a tighter constraint of the genre of YA, I think makes the authors get more creative with the way that they have to sell the romance to you, because they can't rely on sex and lust in the same types of ways that maybe we might be familiar with in other romance novels. And so, yeah, I love this. I'm still thinking about it. I said in my short that for me, this was almost just a 4-star read, because it had what I like to call a fake ending, where it felt like everything was wrapping up. We defeated the main conflict, all the mysteries had been revealed, and we were done. It felt like we had come to an end, and then there was 2 extra chapters that completely blew me away and totally pushed it to a 5-star for me. So can't recommend this more. It was so good. I loved it. And I went ahead and pre-ordered her adult fantasy that's coming out in July. 2 books in 1 year. Thank you, Miss Steven. So yeah, definitely really excited and really looking forward to that. That one's called Silver Cloak, coming out in July. Then number 2 of quarter 1 was Legendborn This is another YA, and I think what I'm realizing in this quarter is that I really do love a good YA, because I also reread all of the Hunger Games and had an incredible time with those. But yeah, this was so unique and so fresh, but it gave me the same giddy feeling I had when I was reading books in high school. So the series that stands out to me the most from that time was when I was really into City of Bones. And I compared this to this in vibes, like that it gave me. It gave me a nostalgic feeling of, I felt like I was a teenager tearing through a book again. It does not compare to City of Bones in pretty much any other way, other than the fact that we have like a shadow society, like a society of people that's living alongside the normal folk. But that's like that's where the comparison stops. But in vibes and in the way I was excited and sort of tearing through this book, that's the feeling that it gave me. And I also just loved the way that when we have diverse voices telling us stories, doing fantasy stories, bringing in fantasy elements from beloved, stories from history. So this is an Arthurian legend retelling. It brings such an interesting and important perspective to those stories that has not been done before. And I was just so impressed and blown away with Miss Deonn's take on this story. And I finished Bloodmarked. I liked it. I didn't like it as much as Legendborn. And I think that's pretty common. I think a lot of times sequels struggle a bit because you go from the wow factor of diving into a new world to now we have to really dig in and set in some more heavy plot lines and more world building and more progression of the story and the characters. And so for me, Bloodmarked definitely felt like the middle of something. A lot of things happen and the plot did progress, but it didn't have the same clear narrative arc that Legendborn did. And so now I need to get to Oathbound and see what's happening, because there was quite the cliffhanger at the end of Bloodmarked. So definitely need to get into that. It's on my list to get to soon. So yeah, highly recommend. I love this book so much and I think it's so important, and it just makes me so happy that this exists, that people who look like Bree can walk into a bookstore and pick up a book and just be blown away by how badass and awesome she is. It just makes me really happy. So yes. And then my number one for quarter one had to go to The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. I am such a fan of the world. I've been a fan of the movies since I was a kid. And so finally making time to read The Fellowship of the Ring. Up until this point, I had only read The Hobbit. So making time to finally read the stories. It's funny, the things that carry over from when you're a child, because when I heard people talk about this book when I was younger, they would compare it to the movies and say, things like, oh, it's really surprising because it takes years and years and years for, Frodo to finally leave the Shire, the time between when Gandalf shows up and talks to him about the ring and then goes off to do his research. That's a really long time. And all these things makes you think that maybe it's going to be boring and it's going to drag, but it absolutely does not. The pacing is still there. You're getting swept up into this world that you just want to live in and stay in. And yes, there is a lot of singing. There's a lot of songs. Mr. Tolkien loved to write us a little ditty. But I just had so much fun with this. And I listened to the Andy Serkis narration of this alongside reading it physically, which helped me, I feel like, really immerse myself in the world. But also Andy Serkis is such an incredible voice actor. And the fact that he obviously voices and plays Gollum in the movies, he does that voice really well. But he also imitates a lot of his fellow cast members really well in ways that make you feel like you are with some of the movie characters, some of those actors as well. So yeah, I loved it, and I need to keep reading the rest of them, and maybe I'll try and finish them by the end of the year if I don't get distracted by other things, which is a common problem that I have. I'm crazy. I sat and I made a full 12-month spreadsheet of a TBR so that I could list things out and how I was going to possibly get to a lot of things that are on my radar, because I just felt like every time, even though I do write down my TBR in my journal each month, I felt like every time I went to go do that, it was like, oh my God, but when am I going to get to this? When am I going to read this? When is this going to happen? So yeah, I made a full 12-month breakdown of everything I want to get to this year. And it's a little crazy, but it actually made me feel a lot better. And yeah, so I'll have to squeeze these in on there and see if I can make time for that. But yeah, definitely the number one spot for quarter one has to go to The Fellowship of the Ring. Okay, and we're going to go into some honorable mentions of other books that I really loved. I've got this one sitting right next to me. We had Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. I'm a huge Ali Hazelwood fan. I've not been disappointed by any of her books. Some of them do better for me than others, but this one was definitely not a disappointment. I agree with some who say it's a little long. It's 443 pages, which is a little long for a romance, but I didn't really notice it feeling long or dragging at the time. I think for me, one of the things that I struggle with in romance is insta-love. I'm okay with instant attraction, but when we immediately jump into a situationship or the physical stuff and there's no slow burn, there's no tension, there's none of that going on, it immediately knocks it down for me. I just don't like it as much. So I liked that there was quite a lot of buildup, and then I felt like the things that they worked through in their relationship were very realistic, and I also really enjoyed how the sort of subplot of Scarlett's journey as an athlete was given full attention. So I think maybe one area where she could have cut some pages is by eliminating some of that time spent on her diving struggles, trying to get past her mental block, what it means to her to be a diver, all of those things. And I thought it was really important to the whole story and how we know Scarlett as a character. So I was okay with the length, but just be warned if you're going into this and you're expecting like a quick, 350, 300 page romance, this is going to be longer. But yeah, I really loved it, and I can't believe we're getting 3 Ali releases this year. We've got Problematic Summer Romance next month, and then Mate in October, I believe. So yeah, lots of Ali this year, and I have no complaints about that. Another one I want to shout out is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. For a novella, this has not left my brain since I read it. This is a fantasy imagining of a society of mermaids that was descended from enslaved women who were thrown from the ships as they made the transatlantic journey to America. And it spoke so much about identity and what it means to have trauma as a community and how that can affect your community for generations and generations. There was some climate politics at hand here, identity, and oh my God, it blew me away. And I feel like I need to get myself a physical copy because I want to reread it again. And yeah, so definitely shout out to that one. A couple of other romance books that were 5 stars for me. I read these all in a week. I was really on a kick that week, but I read Ready or Not, Promise Me Sunshine, and First Time Caller. These were all incredible. No notes. Ready or Not, we have accidental pregnancy and friends to lovers. She has a one-night stand, gets pregnant, and then ends up getting a lot of support from her best friend's brother. And I just love these two so much. The end scene when she's giving birth, finally, spoiler alert, I feel like that's not a spoiler if it's a book about pregnancy, hopefully it ends well. But it made me cry. I related to it so much. I mean, I've had 2 kids of my own, but it really reminded me a lot of my second birth experience. And so it was just really an emotional read for me. And then I read Promise Me Sunshine by the same author, Cara Bastone. And I was nervous about this one because my best friend currently is living with cancer. And so I was afraid that this book was going to really mess me up. But surprisingly, the only part that made me cry had to do with her and her mom. But essentially, we have our main character, Lenny, who is trying to build her life, put it back together after her best friend passes away. And I thought it was beautiful and intensely important for the way that it explores grief and identity and how you move on from these things that happen, because at some point they're going to happen to all of us. And I've come to the conclusion that grief plus romance will always do it for me. I will always love it. So yeah, definitely a new auto by author for me. I read both of those books back to back in like a 3-day period. Loved them so much. And then First Time Caller, it wasn't as emotionally deep for me as those other 2, but it is perfect for someone who is looking for a 90s rom-com nostalgia hit without it being like a one-for-one. It was a fresh take on Sleepless in Seattle. So it takes place in Boston, and a young girl calls into a late night call show and starts talking about her mom, and then her mom ends up getting invited to go on that late night talk show. And so we have forced proximity, so much tension of these two crammed into a recording booth together. It was just so sweet and funny, and I loved both of their individual journeys that they went on as they sort of, went through the journey of the book. It was very believable and very real. And yeah, I just loved it. I had a great time with it. Let's see, what else? I finished out the Wayward Pines trilogy, and I've made some reviews on these books individually, and individually I don't necessarily think that they hold up, but all together I loved this trilogy. So if you can get your hands on all three of them at the same time, I think just reading them straight through, you will have such a satisfying experience. Essentially, Wayward Pines, well, you know what? I'm not going to give you a summary because I think it's actually better to go in blind. But if you like Blake Crouch, if you've read any of his writing, it's a little bit different from his standalone books, but no less impressive when it comes to pacing and surprises and his just very characteristic narrative style of just ripping you through a story at a breakneck pace that makes you feel so invested in what's happening with these characters. So definitely highly recommend those, even if I will admit I don't necessarily think each book holds up individually. Let's see. Yes, I did a full Hunger Games reread. Well, I lied. No, I didn't do a full Hunger Games reread because criminally, I still have not read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I regret that a little bit because after a lot of people read Sunrise, they said that there was, they felt very satisfied from like a lore perspective that they had read Ballad, either reread it or made sure they read it first, and I was too impatient, so I didn't do that. But I'm going to read it soon, and I think I'll still enjoy the way that it adds to the world. But Sunrise on the Reaping for me was 5 stars. But I will say, for me, it's 5 stars because of how much I love The Hunger Games. I don't think this can stand up as a 5-star read on its own, and I'll just say that outright. It was a 5-star because of nostalgia and because of love for the series and love for the characters, not because I thought the book was particularly impressive on its own. There have been some call-outs of saying, this is fan service, it's too convenient to have all these characters be popping up, and I think you run the risk of having that happen anytime you write a prequel and you want to factor in other characters, because it feels convenient to just be like, oh yeah, they were here the whole time. But the way that Suzanne Collins writes, I believe that she planned for them to be there the whole time. It does not feel like she retconned her own world to conveniently plug in these characters. As we go through Haymitch's experience, there's particularly an experience he has when he does his chariot ride in front of President Snow, in front of the Capitol, when he makes it to the games. And when you watch the way Woody Harrelson acts out the scene of the Hunger Games, when he watches Katniss and Peeta do their chariot race, I fully believe that Suzanne Collins told him what happened to Haymitch during his own chariot ride. I just think that of all the authors out there who spend a lot of time thinking about their own worlds, I think Suzanne Collins probably has a master list that maybe we'll see when she dies, forever from now. I'm not saying I want her to die, obviously. But I think it's going to be a J.R.R. Tolkien sort of scenario, comparably, not, obviously they write slightly different genres, but I think it's going to be comparable to the fact that we will find all of these documents of her world building, and it'll be clear that she's put a lot of thought into how everything interconnects and not just putting things in for the convenience or the flair or the fun of it. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on Sunrise on the Reaping, but I loved it and I can't wait to see the movie. I'm so excited. What a lucky lady to have written a series that is so impactful that people are still so excited about it 10 years later, and to immediately get a book and a movie deal all at once. I mean, truly, truly incredible. So had a great time reading that. Then I worked through more of S.A. Cosby's backlog. So I read All the Sinners Bleed and Blacktop Wasteland, and I'm actually in the middle of listening to My Darkest Prayer right now because his next book, King of Ashes, is coming out in June. So I wanted to be ready to be caught up on everything that he's written by the time that comes out. But I'm just so impressed with his writing style, and I'm particularly enamored with the combination of his writing and the narration of Adam Lazar White, his narrator for all his books. He does an incredible job, and I don't think I will ever physically read S.A. Cosby's books. I will just listen to them because I cannot imagine a better listening experience than the combination of this author and this narrator. So highly recommend that. Let's see. Okay, and the last thing I have noted here is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is another one that I think you should listen to because the whole premise of the book is this white author, Juniper Song. She somehow ends up at her friend's apartment, who is an Asian American author, ends up at her apartment on a night when that author dies. And this all happens very soon, and I think it's even on the book cover, so it's not a spoiler. But then she steals her manuscript and rewrites it and reprints it as her own. So from there, we descend into the most unhinged chaos of her trying to pull this off without it being obvious that she stole it, because of course it's immediately all over the news that she was there when this truly, truly famous author has died. We've got a lot of like Twitter infighting and scandals, and the way that this narrator puts you in the mind of Juniper Song inside the unhinged mania of this woman who is able to bend over backwards to self-justify her own actions to her. I think the book, physically reading it, would be fine, but I think the audiobook really cemented what Kuang was trying to communicate here. So yeah, had a really great time with that, and I'm trying to work through the rest of her backlog. I think I'm going to try and read Babel next month and then read the Poppy War over the summer. We'll see if I get to that. I think at the very least I want to read Babel before Catabasis comes out, because just from a outside perspective, it seems like those two are the most comparable in her writing. So yeah, hoping to get to that. But quarter one, whew, we read a lot of books, had a great time. I would love to hear what you guys have been reading, what some of your favorites have been from the beginning of the year. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.